Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. Hey, my name's John Sanders. I am one of the co-hosts of the show, and this is episode 30 that you're getting ready to watch. On this episode, Les and I had the privilege of sitting down with an amazing pastor, firefighter, and real estate guy by the name of Jeremy Vandelinder. And I was thrilled to get to meet Jeremy because Jeremy has some things in common with me. I am a pastor. I'm also a full-time firefighter. I'm not yet in real estate, but it is one of my goals to get into real estate. So I was thrilled to have a conversation with Jeremy. I mean, he is the epitome of an EntrePastor. It's what we talk about on this show, how pastors can be successful both in the church ministry as well as in the marketplace ministry. And you're going to hear all of that from Jeremy as we unpack his story about how he went from firefighting into pastoring, into more firefighting, construction, real estate, and a whole lot more. He's got a book coming out. So a great conversation coming your way with Jeremy Vandelinder. Check this out. All right. Well, Jeremy, welcome to the EntrePastors podcast, man. It's great having you on the show.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here. Excited for what you guys are doing.
Yeah, well, I was excited. We're all excited. I mean, there's just a lot of excitement going on here today, but I was excited when I learned that we had a pastor in our group that had also served as a firefighter. I didn't know there were many of us out there. So I was glad to connect with you a while back and just hear more of your story. So
yeah, my brother's a cop, but I turned out a lot cooler than him. So
well, absolutely. I mean, we don't even need to unpack that. Say no more. You said cop. I understand. So
John, I fight fires like a lot, but that doesn't count.
No, the fires you fight are totally different. So okay. I mean, all pastors are firefighters, but there's a few of us that actually get to crawl into buildings and
fair enough,
do some straight up hero stuff. I always say that when we get back in the truck from a call that is not glamorous whatsoever, I'm just like, well, there's some more hero stuff there, and we help pick up a grandma up off the floor or something,
And that's hero stuff.
Well, yeah. It is, but they never show you that on TV. That's not on the brochures when they try and sell the job. Yeah. So, well, anyway, Jeremy, why don't we just start with a little bit of an introduction? Tell us your story. Tell us where you live, and tell us about how you got into pastoral ministry, and then we'll start getting into the business side of things.
Okay. Well, I am a church planter pastor in Round Rock, Texas, which is a northern suburb of Austin. And Austin, Texas. So been here since 2010, moved here, started the church in 2011. As far as my story, it was really interesting. You guys interviewed Nathan Bate a while back, my friend Nathan, and I have kind of similar paths in a lot of ways. I was listening to his story thinking we'd probably just be replay his in some ways. But basically, I grew up in a pastor's home, so have had a desire for pastoral ministry really as long as I can remember. Went through, the phases like every little boy of wanting to be a firefighter. And I guess I never totally outgrew that. Right. But basically I always sense that direction towards ministry in my life, for really as long as I can remember. I worked my way through college, in public safety. I got my EMT license in 97. And I've been involved in public safety, emergency services in some form or fashion, really ever since then. I even, after I graduated from college in 2000 and went into full-time ministry, I continued to keep my hands in EMS in particular, was where most of my experience has been. But I have been a firefighter. Like I said, most of my career was EMS and also a public safety officer for 4 years. And then in full-time ministry since 2000, continued to stay involved in public safety. When I moved here in 2010, my attention shifted a little bit more towards crisis intervention, traumatic stress. A lot of our first responders just have profound questions, needs, and really a lot of the opportunities that I was seeing in the public safety world gave me an avenue for a special kind of ministry. And so I've kind of shifted more in the last decade or so to that. In that context, I worked for our local fire department as their chaplain and their director of victim services. So was helping our firefighters and also helping our citizens who were going through difficult situations, the loss of a loved one, a house fire, those kind of things. So was responding to those, but in a little bit different role. Kept my EMT licenses current, but my role, kind of became different. While all of that was going on, we planted a church in 2011, and we've had some ups and downs as church planting usually goes. And I was looking for, a vehicle by which I could build a little bit more of a future for my family, and started looking pretty seriously at real estate. We had a house that we had moved out of when we moved here in Florida, and put that house up for rent instead of selling it. Just the time was right to rent, not to sell. And so, interestingly enough, I was thinking about, what are we going to do? How are we going to come up with more funds and all that kind of stuff? And mentioned to a pastor friend when I was at a conference that, I was thinking about selling this house and that I'm renting out. And he's like, no, don't sell it. I'm like, no. He said, no, let me tell you what I'm doing. And so he started telling me about his investments and real estate and what all he was involved in. And here's a guy that doesn't even need to take a salary from his church, because he's doing well with the other things that he's got going on. And so I said, I'm a reader. So I said, give me some books to read. So he listed off, 5, 6 books. And I started reading and spent about a year just really delving into real estate investing, the hows and the whys. And after a while, I kind of came to the conclusion, this isn't rocket science. If you can make decisions, if you can do math, you're probably going to do okay in real estate investing if you're doing it right. So really got into it in earnest in 2015. Meanwhile, again, ministry's going on, ministry and the fire department's going on. And in 2017, I bought my first fire damaged house and flipped it. And it went pretty well. Actually, that house got on HGTV, incidentally enough.
Cool.
I didn't, but the house did. But so anyway, so the one fire damage property led to 2, led to 3, led to a niche, which in real estate investing, it's helpful to have something that you kind of run towards that investors don't want to do. So we started flipping fire damage properties, and then came to the conclusion that, hey, if we can do it for ourselves, we can do it for customers. So in 2019, I stepped away from the fire department and I started this company, which is a restoration and construction company, including an emergency service component that's associated with a national hotline. So we will come out, we provide victim services, we secure the house, and then we build trust with the homeowner. And a lot of time that leads to, hey, we want you to just do the whole thing, do the mitigation for us, do the rebuild for us. That's not our that's not what we're there to do in that initial phase. We're there to help them. And we really see ourselves as a victim services company. And so we're still kind of responding to fires, but in a different role, and still doing a lot of the traumatic stress crisis intervention. So I've got, pastoring going on, running this business, running the real estate investing, also still doing some work in crisis intervention. In fact, we're writing a book right now. I say I've got a co-author who's a colonel in the U.S. Army, and we're writing a book on trauma, and hoping to help some people with that as well. So that's kind of a quick 30,000 foot view.
I love all of that. You did a great job of just sharing that at kind of the high level. There's so many directions we could go with this, but maybe one thing I want to call out, this isn't really a question, it's more of a statement, and then we'll see where it goes. But is what I want our audience to hear is that you're a pastor, you have this heart for the church, a heart for, ministry in its traditional sense. And yet there's so many different areas that you took that heart and then found a way to bring that to bear in the marketplace in some way. You had a passion for firefighting and first responders, and there's multiple ways that you have done both ministry and business as a result of that, whether it's through the crisis intervention stuff, which we'll go deeper into here in a minute, or even the real estate side of things. Again, you're right there on the front lines when someone's home they've had a fire. It's not only is it an issue with the home itself, there's a huge psychological component to that, when someone's
Right.
lost a bunch of stuff in a
Right.
fire. And so you're there to serve them, but now it opens the door to other business opportunities down the road. You're not there like a vulture, waiting to make a sale. You're there to serve someone in their time of need and provide a needed service. I'm guessing most people don't walk around with a fire restoration company on speed dial. Who can I call when my
Right.
home needs to be boarded up? And here you are to provide that service. So I just love that, man. I love you've got multiple things going on, and I want our pastors listening to this to hear that it is possible to take. So here's where I'm going to go with my next question. Going back in the conversation a minute, you talked about reaching a point in your church planting journey where you realized, bottom line, we need to do a little bit better financially. Take us there. Talk to us there, because that's where a lot of pastors are at. They don't have to take the same path you did in the businesses that you're doing. But unpack that for me. Like, what was that like for you to realize I need to make more money? How can I go about doing that? I've been called to be a pastor. Like, unpack that whole part of the story.
Yeah. So we were at a point when I first got into real estate investing where we were full-time, in the sense that between the support that we were getting from outside and within our church, we were fine, but living paycheck to paycheck. So not building a future. And that's where my wheels were turning, as far as where can we go to build more of a future for our family. And that was when I initially got into real estate. But then as things at the church changed, it's like, hey, we got to cut the budget. And I'm sitting there with the finance committee saying, you guys cut my salary. Well, Pastor, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that. I'm like, well, where else is the money going to come from? Right. I mean, you got to, and I'll just lean more into real estate investing. And so that's what I did. The challenge with real estate investing is it's a long-term play, and it's not a, week by week, you're building wealth, but you're building a lot of it on paper. And so that was where we kind of had to pivot a couple times just to see what was going to work. Even the crisis intervention, I was teaching for a while in that arena, but in order to keep those gigs coming would have taken an incredible marketing machine. And that was when we made the decision, okay, let's move towards more of a service-based company. And that's, I'm whatever term you want to use, bivocational, tent maker, that kind of thing, but entrepreneurial in that sense. I don't know if that fully answers your question.
No, it is. It's good. And I want to back up even to the point of like your crisis intervention. And so here you are, you've grown up in the church, you have a heart for the church, but you also love the whole first responder thing. I think what I want our listeners to hear is that so often we get told it's an either or thing. Well, then to serve God means you got to pick one, and really, if you really want to serve God, you need to pick the church one, the pulpit one. And I want our listeners to understand, if God has put something in your heart, there's a reason for it. If there's something about responding to people in their moments of need in emergency medicine and firefighting, like God, and that this obviously resonates with me for obvious reasons, but God put that there, and it can be a source of ministry. It can be a source of income. And what would it look like if we told our pastors that it's not only okay, it's actually good to embrace that and say, okay, so where can I use this outside of the four walls of my church, and in a way that blesses not only the people I'm serving in that capacity, but, blesses us financially. Because I had a similar path in terms of when I got back into full-time firefighting, I quickly got into the same world of like the trauma aspect of it, the mental health aspect of it. And I launched a podcast, and I had a little bit of revenue that came as a result of that. And so again, not that all pastors need to go that route, but to know that where can I use what God has given me to go out and serve in a similar way. So I just love that about your story, and love how you've positioned yourself. So go ahead, if you were going to say something there.
Yeah, and just to take a little bit different tack. Sometimes, Jeremy, the response that John and I get with this message is there are some haters out there, and if to give them the benefit of the doubt, they you can tell that they really don't get it, and here's how. Because when when the scenario is presented that John just mentioned, it's such a, it's as if some people will either say it or imply that to choose that vocational ministry track as opposed to choosing more of a self-centered, world-focused, materialistic, or greedy track, as if those two paths, are mutually exclusive. To put it differently, some would say, well, one track is being obedient to the Lord and one's kind of going our own way. But good grief, right. What you described as the other side of ministry, outside the walls of that vocational, what most people would consider a vocational full-time pastoral role, it is, you're serving people in a time where there is a place for coming alongside and comforting and counseling and praying with and all of that. But those people have a life that they need to live that takes some place to live and, clothes to be replaced and just basic necessities. And then they need to move on so that they don't have a total loss. So and those sheetrock companies they don't give materials away most of the time. The lumber companies don't give materials away most of the time. The subcontractors aren't going to do all that work gratis. And so that has to come from somewhere. And the service you're providing is absolutely as much a ministry to those families.
Yeah, I think sometimes the pill's a little easier to swallow for folks if they can draw a line to how this is ministry, how this is, productive for the church as well. It's maybe a little harder to see that, like with construction work versus, the chaplaincy, for example, where, the two kind of synchronize a little bit better. But at the end of the day, not only a good business strategy, but a good philosophy of our life is provide value first, right? Serve people first, and then that will pay for itself in the long run. And that's our philosophy as a company. And I tell guys, we're not a restoration company. We're not a board up company. What we are first and foremost is a victim services company, and everything else flows out of that.
Well, to paraphrase James, when you see someone that's in need and you say, well, I'll pray for you, be warm and well fed, but don't do anything at all to help them in that situation, then it's what you call faith without any works, which he says is dead. Sermon over.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to ask you to go down a route, because this, again, there's some crossover here in the realm of like the mental health, the trauma, the critical incident stuff, where you are currently writing a book, which I'd love to hear more about that. In that realm, I have heard people say in the fire service, well, how could anybody charge money for that? Like, if you're trying to help people, avoid taking their life in suicide, how in the world could you build a business around that and monetize that? And again, to me, that just flows out of this scarcity mindset of that somehow says, like, I'm taking something from you because I'm providing a service here and charging for my service, even though we would never hold that same philosophy up to, our mechanics or electricians or other people who provide a valuable service. We understand they charge for that. So walk me through that. Like, have you experienced either personally or externally from other people that sense of, but you're a pastor, this ought to just be something that you're doing for free, and because it's ministry? Like, has that come up in your world at all, especially in that arena?
It's a challenge, no doubt. And people sometimes just don't understand the economics of the situation, right? You still got to make a living. You still got to feed your family. And if I could do all of this, I was just independently wealthy and I could do it all for free, obviously I would. Now it helped that in my fire department, I was a volunteer for 3 or 4 years before they ever started paying me. So I think it kind of communicated, like, I'm here to serve, I'm here to help. And then eventually they saw the value in that and started paying me for it. It wasn't great, but they were paying me a little something. So I kind of had a, 1099 extra thing going on. So my ministry, my outreach, if you will, was something that I was getting paid for. You just kind of have to understand where people are coming from and just to kind of kindly and gently explain the economics of it. I mean, the reality of it is, I've got a family and I've got to support my family, and I would love to do this for free. The reason that this is something that, that I get paid for is so that I can offer my time more free, more accessibly.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to understand that. And you just kind of have to have a little bit of thick skin and,
Yeah. Well,
Shake
again,
your
I think
head.
the
No,
reason
wrong.
it's worth bringing up here is because in ministry, so often with pastors, when we think about applying our skill set out in the marketplace somewhere, it's for many pastors, it's hard to get past it. It's like, well, since I counsel people for free as a part of being a pastor, I have to keep doing that out there as well. Or since I'm kind of coaching people inside the church for free, it's just expected along with all of my job description, then anywhere I go to do those things, I ought to just do it for low or no cost. And that's really the mindset that we're trying to help pastors overcome. Like, you have skills that are valuable, and if applied in the marketplace, you can deliver tremendous value to people, and you can also build a business around it. You can monetize some of those skill sets, and it's not only okay, it's good. That's my opinion. I'm saying that, like, I think it's a good thing when a pastor can engage in the marketplace using his or her skill set like that. So I love that about your
Sure,
story, man.
sure. And sometimes it's actually less of an obstacle. My observation is sometimes less of an obstacle in the marketplace than it is in the church.
Bingo. Tell me
Yep.
more about that. Why do you say that?
Well, I think people in the marketplace understand that ironically, they understand the verse that the laborer is worthy of his hire, right? They understand you got to pay for services, and nobody can do what they do for free. And so I have seen it come up sometimes in the fire department, kind of the attitude of, well, you're a pastor, you should do this for free. But by and large, I probably see that resistance more with the church. And I don't mean any specific church, just in general with believers, than I do in the marketplace, especially in the business professional community.
Yeah. And when I hear that, like, my thought immediately goes to, I'm mad at the church for that. And then I'm like, well, who's leading the church? It's us, it's pastors.
Sure.
So I wonder if this is a leadership issue, Pastor. I wonder if one of the reasons we have such scarcity, poverty thinking in the church is because we have such scarcity thinking, poverty among pastors. But then I
So
can blame the church. Which came first, the people or the pastors? Where did
So on a
this?
pastoral level, one of my little kind of rules of thumb as a pastor is if somebody does something for a living, they do that for income, we as a church will pay them for that. Now, if they say, oh, no, I want to paint the auditorium for free, then that's fine. You can turn that down, or you can turn it back in the offering plate. You can do whatever you want. But we're as a church not going to expect somebody to do something for free on a volunteer basis if that's their means of income, right? So a guy comes to fill the pulpit who's a pastor, or who's an evangelist or whatever, we're gonna pay that guy. Likewise, if a guy's a painter or a craftsman or paves the parking lot or whatever, just because he's in the church and owns a paving business doesn't mean he should pave the parking lot for free, right? We should offer to pay that. So I think it's just a little bit of a statement to the church that, like, people are worth paying, and this is how they make their living. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. I got a real practical question for you. Walk us through when you decided to launch a business that's really built around the fire restoration. I mean, it sounds like you were already in real estate before you really went into that niche, correct? You had already been investing in some real estate. Right. So you would already maybe walk through some of this, you're in business, you see yourself as having a role in the marketplace. But specifically, I just want to ask you about the startup story around that. Like, how does a pastor that's listening to this today that has an idea, maybe they see a need in the marketplace that they think they could meet, walk us through how you went about starting that up and getting a business started around that?
So to a certain extent, by flipping fire damaged houses, I had a pilot program. So I had some proof of concept. Like, I could actually talk to the SBA and they say, how much experience do you have in this business? Well, I've got 3 years experience, right? So there's a little bit of a testing the waters there. It's not completely outside of the realm of what I've been doing.
Right.
How we got started, I was thinking about this idea already. There's a company, a national hotline, that's 1-800-BOARD-UP, that I found out the local affiliate, the franchise, was available here. And interestingly enough, that's a company that I used to call when I was a chaplain. And because they would take care of people, they prioritized taking care of the victims. And so when I, kind of all of those things align, I was like, this is a good fit. And I had been on the user side of it. So I felt like there were some ways that I could kind of build on what we already had, or what I had seen. So then it was just basically writing a marketing plan or writing a business plan, getting an SBA loan, and firing up that engine. We basically 2019 was really kind of our getting started year. 2020, we bumped along. We didn't really make a lot. We just kind of broke even. And then in February of last year, 2021, Texas had the largest run of freezing temperatures ever on record. And everybody's pipes burst and everything flooded. And we signed more business from that one event than we had in all of the previous year.
Wow.
So our business has just blown up. We went from, a little one-man band to, now 3 employees, 4 employees, a couple of 3 full-time, couple of part-time employees, subcontractors, adding extra equipment, all that. So really this year has been a lot of growing pains and figuring out, okay, what does this business look like now as a little bit bigger business. We're running a little under this past year, a little under $2 million in gross revenue. So it's a lot. It's just a lot to figure out all of those pieces. That's kind of how we got started. Was there something more particular that?
No, that's good. I love hearing that story. It's just practical to hear kind of how you backed into that, how what your thought process was there. So that's helpful. I know that's going to help someone out there. I have just a few more questions that are popping in my mind before we go backstage. I want to talk about your book here in just a moment, but one other question that I've got is maybe around the subject of like time management, because ministry in being a pastor is challenging enough, at times overwhelming enough, and now you've got your hand in all these other things. So how do you do it? I'm sure you get that question on a regular basis. Jeremy, how do you do all these things? What tips would you give us?
It's a great question. I do get it a lot. There's 2 answers. First of all, I don't always do it. And sometimes you just have to say that's just not going to get done. So you have to be okay with that. So that's one part of the answer. And I think the second part of the answer is team. There's nothing that I'm doing that I don't have other people involved in. Obviously my wife is my biggest supporter and cheerleader. And I couldn't do what I do without her. I've got a great administrative assistant at the church, fantastic associate pastor. As far as my business team, my employees, my bookkeeper, my CPA, my attorneys. So you've got to lean on other people, really work with a team such that you are able to get a lot of your off your plate. So what do they say? This probably came from a business book I read somewhere. Don't do what you can delegate, and don't delegate what you can automate. So if I'm doing something and I think to myself, I could delegate this. Okay, now it's time to put into a system that I can hand off to somebody else. And now with technology, there's so much you can automate.
Right.
So that's a big part of the answer. And I think that's maybe one of the biggest lessons I've learned being in business is, we as pastors don't always delegate well. We don't always leverage the gifts of other people as well as we could. And you know what? That task that you do over and over again, and it just drives you crazy and you hate doing, there's probably somebody out there that loves doing that.
Yeah.
And once, because we're all wired differently. And so I think that's a valuable thing to be able to leverage off. Not in the sense of, I'm too good for this. I don't want to get my hands dirty. I'm always willing to jump in and help. But in the sense that, I might not be the best person to do that. Another phrase that you'll hear in business is only do what only you can do.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I work is as I'm doing stuff, especially if it becomes repetitive, I think, okay, can we move this to another system? And frankly, just kind of go off on a tangent here a little bit. There's a lot of bad in business books and podcasts and all that stuff too, because there's a lot of it that's steeped in greed and kind of I hope I don't offend any of your listeners. I'm not a fan of the word of faith, prosperity theology movement. Nope. And there's a lot of that that's kind of repackaged into business. So there's some things that I think are dangerous, but by the same token, there's also some things that I think we really can learn from the business world. Sound business practices, organizational leadership, how to delegate, like we were talking about, leveraging the talents of others. So those are the things that have been really enriching to me to learn is where can we gain wisdom from others who are, doing some things that they're maybe they're doing a little better than us, and we could kind of learn from. So
Yeah, that's well said. I've heard a lot of resistance over the years from pastors and Christians about, learning things for the church from business. And I think that's silly. I think it's smart to, eat the meat and spit out the bones and read those things with discernment. But I also believe that all truth is God's truth. So if there's a principle that is true and it works, then it doesn't matter if it's being, largely used in the business sense. Like, the church can learn from that. The church can lean into that, because, again, not to say that everything that works in business works in the church. I'm not saying that, but I think we should be way more open to it than suspicious of it, and
sure. And I think some of that reaction comes out of the tendency to over market the church, to make it a marketing venture. And it's different in that way. I mean, the purpose of business is basically to please your client, to give your client what he or she wants. Whereas in the church, our goal is discipleship. It's fundamentally to change the client, if you will, right? It's to invoke change. So that's the key distinction between the two. What is similar, though, is a lot of the business world understands organizational leadership sometimes better than we do. And so that's where I've been enriched and blessed by that, really getting tapped in more to the business world.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, one of the things that I've just sense from you that's the beautiful way that these dovetail together is that there are different reasons for somebody choosing an entrepreneurial lifestyle. And one might be that you just want some different things for yourself or your family, or to have some different experiences, or, but in your case, though, it just seems to me like I think it's fair to say, you correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it's fair to say that you couldn't serve really where you believe God's called you to serve in the way that you're serving it, if not for this other part of your life that's making it possible to do so. Is that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So if I had to, rely on, the church plant is healthy from a spiritual perspective, but we don't have a lot of money. We're a small congregation. If it were not for my ability to pivot and move into this arena, we wouldn't continue. In fact, it's interesting what you said prompted a kind of a little story from when I was making the transition to start this business. I talked to a gentleman about a man who has means, who is a businessman in another area, who's a believer, good man. And I think his advice was very well intentioned. So I don't want to, besmirch his motives. But when I was talking to him, he's like, well, I don't think you should start a business. I think you should just go get a job. I think he really genuinely meant well by that advice. But there's a couple problems with that. Right. So if you take Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant, right? The first is employee. Well, if you're an employee, you clock in, clock out, you are beholden to that employer's management of your time. And I've literally had it happen where it's 7:30 in the morning, a man in my church calls me and said, Pastor, my dad just died. Mom and I are here. We don't know what to do. And I'd be like, I'm getting dressed right now. I'll be there in an hour. I don't have to call my boss. I don't have to take a day off. Like, I can go. I can still be a pastor because of what I'm doing. And then the second thing is the financial pathway to create wealth. You don't really do that trading time for money. And so I'm not trying to criticize the avenue that other men go in tent making by taking a regular 8-to-5 job. I'm not here to, if that's the direction God leads you, that's fine. But for me, entrepreneurship is much more compatible with pastoral ministry than just a traditional job.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep,
Compatible
100%.
and profitable.
Yep. Well, hey, before we wrap up our conversation, I do want you to talk some about the book. We'd like to have you on when it's closer for that to come out and really go public with it. But I do know a little bit about who that book is to serve and what is going to come as a result. So for those that are interested, they're going to lean in now, because this is a message that needs to be heard. So why don't you just share with us who this work is for and what you hope to accomplish through it?
Awesome. Well, thanks. We're super excited about this project. And I say we, my co-author is a colonel in the United States Army, a longtime chaplain, and has seen combat, I think 3 times, if I remember correctly, which, honestly, there are some chaplains that go through the whole career without ever seeing combat. So he's been around the block. He knows. His name's Gary Fisher, and I'm just honored to have him as a co-author. We are really trying to help those who have endured trauma, and we're trying to help them by giving them hope and giving them a pathway forward. And what we want to do is we want to do that by caring for the whole person. There's kind of a mental health model that tends to look at man as simply a physical being and really just wants to think more about the physiology. And there's also sometimes in the Christian church, particularly, kind of this rejection of that model and wants to ascribe everything to it's a spiritual problem. It's a sin issue. And we actually believe that it's a both and, right? There is a physiological care that needs to take place. There is also the fact that we can further complicate our problems if we don't have a right response to the circumstances that we endure. And so really it's a both and. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to help people kind of draw from our experience, my experience, Gary's experience, and then from the situations that others have gone through, and give some help and hope to those that are hurting, because a lot of people go through trauma. It's combat soldiers. It's first responders. But the fact is, there's people out there that have endured, horrific accidents. They have gone through mass disasters. And so we want to help people who have endured trauma by helping them as a whole person.
Love that. That's so good. Well, hey, if someone wanted to reach out and connect with you, what would be the best way for them to contact you, and are you open to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably email is good. Good grief, I got a couple email addresses. Probably the best one to reach me at would be pastor at NHBC Round Rock. Stands for North Hills Baptist Church, Round Rock, all spelled out, .org.
Excellent. Well, Jeremy, if you don't mind joining us backstage here in a few minutes, what I'd like to ask you about there is to go a little bit more into your real estate story. And the way I'll package the question is just, what advice would you give to a pastor that is thinking about getting into the real estate game? Because we've got multiple pastors in our community that some are just killing it right now in the real estate world. Some are wanting to get into that space. I would be one of those that are very much looking at that. So it's a selfish question. I want you to talk to a beginner, talk to someone who's on the verge of jumping in. What did you wish what would you have liked to have known back then? We'll talk about that backstage. And if you're good with it, go into a little bit of more detail on that. Does that sound good?
I'd love to.
Cool. Well, man, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I know this has added tremendous value to our listeners. So thank you so much, my friend. We're grateful for you.
Thank you. Appreciate all you guys are doing.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at EntrePastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.